This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Robert Jaeger is best known in the Atari community as the programmer of the popular game Montezuma's Revenge, which was published by Parker Brothers in 1984. He also programmed Chomper, published by MMG Micro Software, and Pinhead, published by Robert's own company, Utopia Software. This interview took place on December 2nd, 2017.
I was always an arcade kid, and when I started out, it was pinball. The video games. I guess the only video game at the time really was like Pong, and the very, very early video games that weren't that much fun. But as the video games got better, and the arcades started turning towards video games, I totally got completely entranced by the video games. My first home, I had the original Pong home console, and then the video pinball by Atari, and then my father got me the Bally Astrocade, which had a basic programming language cartridge, and that's how I started with software game development. I think I was probably 10 years old when I first started BASIC. And I wrote. I actually, come to think of it, is the name of the podcast Antic? Or
yes, it's Antic after the chip, after the magazine.
Right. Because I just this week I donated about 90 pounds of old magazines from the day, and I think I had every issue of the old Atari magazine that was also called Antic.
Nice.
And analog too. Those were the two hot like Atari fanzines at the time. But right. When I was a little kid, I had a few of my BASIC games published, I believe, in either Antic or Analog. I wrote a clone of Missile Command, and I don't even recall, but I had a few things published at a very young age. My first.
I don't see them. I don't see them. I don't see them in Antic because I can search easily by every author in Antic, so I don't see it there. But it's a type of thing it's kind of on the edge of my memory. I don't remember exactly which magazine it was. I might not be right about it being Antic. But my first commercial product was a Pac-Man clone. I mean, it wasn't a clone; it was a Pac-Man derivative with a maze. It's pretty much the Pac-Man character in a grid-like maze. It was called Chomper. I think I was about 14 years old. Wow! Now, all right. So Chomper, let's not. I don't want to rush ahead too quickly. You've got your Bally Astrocade. You're programming a BASIC on those terrible little keypads, and so when did the Atari enter the scene, and how did you learn machine language?
Actually, let's take a step back. Those games, those BASIC games, those were for the Astrocade, and there was an Astrocade magazine. That's where they were published. This wasn't Atari BASIC.
Okay.
This was Astrocade BASIC. I first got my Atari in the early days of Atari. It was a loaded Atari 800. And I totally fell in love with that. My goal in life was to be, to work for Atari and be an Atari game developer, of course. So I actually started with assembly language back with the Astrocade, and that was Z80. And there was a way to write little subroutines, little functions that interfaced with the BASIC on that. And I quickly, when I got the Atari and I was able to really program, I jumped into the 6502, and I really enjoyed that type of coding. It's really it's very different from what we do now. As far as having such a limited set of tools to work with. Of course, you couldn't even you couldn't even multiply or divide, except, of course you could shift by 2. So even to do division, we had to more or less, build tables and use all kinds of clever shortcuts to keep that, we were going for like 60 frames a second back then, which made those games so much fun.
Yeah.
The great interactivity, the great, that to me, games lost a tremendous amount of fun when people started focusing more on the high resolution graphics rather than the frame rate. Because that fun, that zone, that losing yourself in a game, you need that really, really quick interaction between, the activity on the monitor and your brain. So back in the old days with games, most of the work that we did was in the vertical blank interrupter. Like we synced the code to the display, and we had to assure that that all of the power to render whatever image we had could refresh, within that 60 frames a second.
Right.
So it was an interesting time. So it was an amazing time actually to be involved in games.
Sounds like it. So you got your loaded 800, and did you just immediately jump into programming games and learning the 6502 variant of assembly language?
Yeah. I mean, when I got my Atari, that was it. I mean, it was all about games. The assembly language cartridge, you may recall, and the basic cartridge on the Atari 800. I mean, I knew without a doubt that this is what I wanted to do with my life at a very young age. So I just jumped into making games, and I'll tell you, for every game that I've published, there's probably 10 or 20 that were abandoned, left on the slab, given up for one reason or another. So I was going through my old stuff, and I just came across so many of these abandoned projects.
Wow. Do you still have those discs and stuff?
I have a big box of discs, and with me, half of them are not even labeled. At some point or another, I'm going to have to go through my collection. At the current time, I don't even have a working Atari with a disk drive, so I can't even do it now. But now that we have such a strong community, and so many people are interested in those old days, and I'm interested myself in things that I did that I might not even remember at this point, but so many years ago.
If you want the help, I would love to help you dig into that. I can get stuff off of those discs and move them to a modern computer, and would love to see what you thought of and abandoned, or maybe you have some source code or something, and that would be fantastic.
I appreciate that. One thing that comes to mind that I remember working on was a very good skiing game. At the time, there was like no skiing games, and I wasn't a skier, in a sense. But for me, it was a programming challenge because at the time, no one was able to figure out how to scroll a full screen in the high resolution mode. If you must remember Eastern Front. You remember Eastern Front?
Absolutely.
Chris Crawford's
sure.
game. That scrolled, the entire Atari. It was a beautiful scrolling map. It was gorgeous, but it didn't use the high resolution. It used the thicker pixels. I don't remember the mode numbers, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I set out to do that level of scrolling, that full screen, crystal smooth scrolling in the higher resolution mode for the skiing game. And I got very, very close to doing it. I had to trim it down a little bit in order to get the frame rate right. But that was one game that I did get pretty far with, and I threw it aside. I mean, it's a good chance I might have started working on Montezuma at that time. I definitely have, all of my major projects kind of took little bits and pieces from these abandoned things, and all game design is, especially these days, is taking pieces of previous code and polishing it up and putting it together in a new, better way.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of that going on.
So was Chomper your first completed project that you thought was worthy of publication?
Yeah, it was. It got rejected everywhere because it was, too close to Pac-Man. It's funny when we think about the old days. There were so many arcade clones, and even the major publishers, I'm sure you remember, had arcade clones that they would never do today. At the time, back in the '80s, it was the whole software thing and games, and it was so new. Like no one really understood that. They didn't really. This is stealing intellectual property. We never thought of that. Thought of it in that way. We thought we were like kind of doing a tribute to the game. So my Chomper, which it's certainly not a Pac-Man clone, but it definitely is a clone of the Pac-Man character. But the game would have been just the same if it was a car, running over dots rather than a Pac-Man. I should have created an original character for the game, and then it wouldn't be a Pac-Man clone at all. But it was rejected from the Atari Program Exchange, rejected from Quality Software. It was rejected. I sent it off to a bunch of places, and it got rejected. And eventually, it was sold through a real mom-and-pop publisher that was local here in New Jersey, called MMG Micro Software was the name of the company. Mm-hmm. And I think they probably had like 5 or 6 Atari programs, and they weren't bad, but it was probably the most minor publisher in the history of Atari. You published that one.
So how old were you at the time, approximately?
I was about 14 or so.
Yeah.
I think.
So did you get a royalty off this, or they just pay you a flat? Yeah.
I think I made a couple $100 off of that in royalties. It never was, it never was anything. But also keep in mind back then, all of these games, like all of my games, including Montezuma, like what I'm saying before, as far as people didn't take intellectual property as seriously. We didn't as developers, but the people, really didn't. And everyone just copied software and gave it to each other. So even though my Pac-Man clone only sold, a few hundred copies, it got distributed to thousands and thousands of people, and it had my name on it, to this day. So, we didn't understand at the time that these games and that this period of time is going to be such an important period of time in gaming in general. I really thought in 1983, more or less, when we had the first, collapse, that it was kind of over. That was it. We had our games, and now whatever, it's done.
All right, so you did Chomper, and let's see. I just have your list of your games here. I'm not sure the order. Pinhead.
Pinhead, yeah, that was my second commercial venture, and at the time. I had my Chomper, and I'm thinking, I didn't make much money with Chomper, and I'm thinking, a lot of people are doing the mom and pop thing, doing the development thing. So I did it myself. Myself with my father, who did all the adult work. But we actually sold the packaged and reproduced the discs and the cassettes at the time, and advertised it and promoted it, did everything, and it actually, Pinhead was another arcade clone from the game Kickman, which is an extremely unsuccessful arcade game. But like Chomper, it wasn't a direct knockoff. It was certainly, you look at it, you can see it's a derivative. But I had plenty of my own ideas in the game, and also it took me a while to learn my lesson. In Pinhead, Pac-Man makes an appearance in one of the cutscenes in Pinhead. So if you get after the second or third level of Pinhead, the break is Pac-Man comes out in the sky, he just comes gobbling down, and Pinhead the clown looks up, and there's a question mark above his head, who is this guy? And then Pac-Man just comes down and eats him. and then a new Pinhead appears, and then the game continues. It's just a joke. I like to throw a little, just a little computer game comedy in the products.
That's awesome.
In my games.
So that was published by Utopia Software. Was that you?
Yeah, that was my company. Utopia Software was my little game company, and we sold Pinhead, but we were planning on selling Montezuma's Revenge. So Pinhead was selling moderately. I certainly wasn't getting rich on it, but it was selling. We were active, and I was developing Montezuma. And I said, now let's do something original. No more of these arcade clones. I really wanted to do something to show off the technology and to do something that was just, you can't look at it and say, oh, that's a clone of that. There certainly have been many games that have served as inspiration to Montezuma's Revenge.
Sure.
But that was my first, my only real, innovative game. Now, going back to Pinhead, the Pinhead was selling okay. I was working on Montezuma, and my father managed to get a share of a booth at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I believe it was 1982 or 1983. I'm not even sure, but we had a little tiny booth that we shared with a blank videotape manufacturer. And I showed Pinhead, and I showed the under development Montezuma's Revenge. And of course, it was Montezuma that got all the attention, at the show. And that is where I eventually met Parker Brothers, and everything moved forward from that. That show is a major turning point in my games career.
It sounded like, based on what I read, that like literally someone from Parker Brothers saw what you were doing and wandered over and started talking to you about it. Is that something like that happened?
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened. Everyone has their name tag and the company they're from at these shows, and we're just at the booth and doing the booth things, and we just noticed one guy from Parker Brothers taking a look, and then two or three come over, and then a group come over, and I think, wow, this is kind of cool. The Parker Brothers people seem to be interested. And they spoke to us, and they wound up taking me out to dinner and discussing, business at the time. And it was something. I was a kid and being treated as something really special, with all these adults. And we managed to do a licensing deal with Parker. A few months later.
Wow. How far along was the game when they saw it? Do you remember?
The game was pretty far along. I mean, I certainly had the initial puzzle, the first main door key challenge in Montezuma. So the demo, was able to give everyone a very good idea what the game was really about. The thing is, Montezuma's Revenge, there's two versions out there, and most people who know the game are aware of this.
Yeah.
My original demo, which was my Parker Brothers demo, this was the game that was actually released from Parker Brothers. In other words, it escaped. It escaped out into the pirate world from them. Most likely. I mean, no one else had it at that time.
Yeah.
But there was that version, and then there was the official version. Now, I was originally developing for a loaded Atari 800 because I wanted this product to show off the Atari 800. Mm-hmm. Parker Brothers is interested in marketing the game, and they're looking at marketing, for every platform available.
Right.
And they want to market to people that have a minimal Atari 400.
Right, with 8K or 16K or whatever on it. Yeah.
Right. So they basically told me, don't even worry about finishing the game. We're going to have to cut things out of it to make it fit. So on one hand, I'm like, well, I really wanted to make this the ultimate Atari product. And on the other hand, I just got to deal with Parker Brothers. They know what they're doing. I'm not gonna tell them. They understand it, and they're asking me to do less work and not more work. And I'm like, it's not the type of thing that I was going to argue with them about.
Sure.
So what they wound up doing is they did a spectacular job. I thought on porting it to, keeping the spirit of the game in so many different ports. But what they took out a few features. They took out the bat. The original game had a bat that served as a timer. So every room, if you stayed in the room for more than 20 seconds or so, this bat would come out of one of the doorways, and he would grab you and sweep you away if you didn't get out of that room.
Okay.
So it was kind of like you had extra pressure to do whatever you had to do.
The evil auto of the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to know something? That was probably inspired by Evil Otto in Berserk. Yeah, it's very much like that. And what else did they take out? They took that out, and the boss. Yeah, I was working on a real big Montezuma boss, and in the game that escaped, that's the thing. People get all the way to the boss, and how do you defeat the boss? There's no way to defeat the boss. I didn't like that. I was working on ideas to come up with a really great boss level.
Yeah.
But the eventual release of Montezuma, even though it was a big success, it wasn't as complete and as big of a game as my original idea was.
Yeah.
And I keep, it's been so many years, and I keep telling people, one of these years I will finish this game. I will. I just need this chunk of time.
Yeah.
To make that happen.
Oh man. Well, I'm sure we would all love to see that. I want to talk about your youth and dealing with these companies like Parker Brothers. Where I assume you were. I don't want to assume, but at that age, I was a geek, and I would have probably not been the best at dealing with business folks in suits taking me out to dinner. And so I'm wondering, like, how were you scared? What was the role of your dad in helping shepherd you through all this?
Well, my dad was great, and one thing that was really terrific was the fact that he got us a very good attorney who was who knew exactly what to do as far as insisting upon a licensing deal, even though, of course, Parker, wanted to buy the product and buy everything outright. And we managed to do the smart thing to license it and have the rights revert back to me. So, things like this, a 14-year-old doesn't know about.
Yeah.
So even though when it came down to the adult things, I let the adult took care of that, and that was my father at the time. But I guess I was a little bit of an obnoxious kid. When you're a little kid and you're doing things that are just, that you realize that other kids can't do, and you're being treated in a special way, it could be a little overwhelming, and you could think a little, I could see, looking back at the time, I certainly wasn't, a polished professional. But it was a great time. It was fun. Yeah.
I had read that the idea for Montezuma, including the name, was handed to you by a friend. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, Mark Sunshine. I thanks for bringing that up, because I like to talk about Mark on every interview. Mark's a great friend to this day, and we're actually working on a little project, an art project together right now.
Nice.
Mark's a great artist, a great singer, and he was just an old friend, and we were just talking, and I said, listen, I want to do something original. I want to know more of this arcade clones. And he's like, just come up with a Mesoamerican theme game and call it Montezuma's Revenge. And this is Mark's sense of humor, even as a kid. It's like, he heard Montezuma's Revenge, and he's thinking, that's a great name for a video game. I'm like, okay, what the hell? and that was it. I mean, I guess, at the time, I told him, I'm going to, include you in the concept for every version of, Montezuma's Revenge, and you'll always, be as a part of the history of this game. But Mark and I, we go way back. What we're doing right now is I have an arcade, a MAME arcade cabinet. Uh-huh. And I'm converting it into the imaginary coin-operated Montezuma's Revenge game. So,
nice.
So Mark is doing all the graphics for it. And in my Facebook group, I have a Montezuma's Revenge Facebook. I think it's just called Montezuma's Revenge Game. Facebook/Montezuma's Revenge Game. I put up the graphics as he's doing it, and it's going to be really cool. It's just like a little vanity project that we're doing.
So if you want to check it out, check out my Facebook page.
Yeah, I will find that and put a link in. So, all right, let's talk about money. Was this a huge financial win for you guys?
Oh, hell no. No, I mean, for a teenager, I did very well. When I bought myself a nice Pontiac Trans Am for my 17th birthday. But I did not get rich or even, well off from the royalties of Montezuma's Revenge. I mean, I did well. I'm not going to get into the exact details, but it isn't like, you see, the problem is I neglected the brand. Like, I think personally, you think of like Prince of Persia. I mean, I believe that went on. Disney eventually acquired that.
Sure, yeah.
And there were other product lines of the time that they had better business support, continued with it, and eventually were able to merchandise. And that's where the real money is, when that happens. But back then, I got a great deal with Parker Brothers, and I got royalties on all of the versions. The Atari 2600 version, every version of the game. But once again, what I was saying before, everyone knew the game, everyone played the game, but not that many people actually went to the store and bought it. That's the reality of computer games. More so then than now.
Sure. Yeah, I had a pirated copy of it. Sorry.
Everyone did. Yeah. It's no big deal. But I mean, hey, but it was such a loose thing back when. I kind of learned my skills by doing hackers things back then. Figuring out how to get around the copy protection that people were putting in. It was one of those little challenges. I had a friend who worked in a computer store. He would bring me the games on the first day, and there was a time when he would set a timer to see how long it would take me to crack a game. Because I was able to read the disassembled code really, really well. And just I was able to search and find the exact area sometimes within a minute or two. Hacker things like that. Another product of mine that somehow managed to get released into the Atari world was something called Jawbreaker Construction Set.
Yes,
Jawmap, I believe was it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a hack. That was a hack of Jawbreaker, the superb Pac-Man clone.
Right. John Harris.
In the day.
Yeah,
John Harris, another young person developer at the time, who I've never met, and. He's phenomenal. I hacked the map. I mean, I was able to tell that they were using the character set, and I just wondered: is he feeling the characters? Is he feeling, or like what method is he using to make the Pac-Man characters stay in the map? And sure enough, it was he was in fact looking at the character to determine what the maze was. So I wrote a full editor so you could edit your own maze within Jawbreaker. I was really proud of that. I was very young when I wrote that one, and I see online that it somehow managed to get out into the world. So that was just a fun little hacker project that I did as a kid.
That's awesome. We've talked about a couple of other things that weren't released. Do you remember any other hacker projects or things that you worked on and didn't put out there?
That skiing game was the big one. I was an early developer for Amiga, the Amiga computer. That was, I guess, see, after Montezuma, I really didn't do much in games for a while. When the Amiga first came out, and I saw those graphics, especially their 32-bit color mode, which was, at the time was so ridiculously good that I wanted to get involved in that. And I was writing a poker game with interactive animated characters around a poker table for the Amiga, and I got pretty far with that one, and I gave up on that one too. Those were the two. The skiing game and the poker game. Those were probably the two games that I gave up that were pretty far along. Most of them, I give up early because
so much of this in the early game work was like, oh, I have an idea. Let's see if the technology could handle my idea. And then more often than not, it can't.
But you had to find out, and you might learn something along the way.
Exploratory stuff, and then you're like, this is a good idea, but I can't get nearly the 60 frames a second I want. So you just give it up and move on to the next thing.
Right. All right. So some time ago, I talked to a man named Gary Walton, who was a Florida computer store owner and pirate, and he told me a story about you. And I want to see if I can get your take on it.
Okay.
The quote I had written down at the time, he said, one day I call up there and I can't get a hold of Robert. Instead, I get a hold of his mother. And I was like, yes, ma'am, may I please speak with Robert? And she's like, who are you? I'm a friend of Robert's. Are you one of those? I don't know your mom's voice. I'm making up an angry mom voice. Are you one of those computer pirates? These computer pirates are getting Robert in trouble, and he's only 16 years old. He doesn't need this type of trouble.
That sounds like you spoke to my sister, not my mother. but no, I was. I got to tell you, I don't recall that particular story, although it is certainly possible that something like that happened. What I do recall, though, was we would get when word got out that the 16-year-old wrote a top-selling computer game. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of offers for interviews from magazines and especially local things. And I was extremely shy and very much, I did not want to talk to anyone about what I did. And I just declined. So people would call and they're like, oh, we're sorry. He just doesn't do that. He doesn't want to talk to people about what he does. I was a weird kid. I didn't know how to market myself in any way, but I was a kid.
Sure. Let's talk, if we can, a little bit about the technology and Montezuma's Revenge, kind of behind the scenes. I assume it's done with character mode with redefined graphics primarily. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. It's using the character mode, and the sprites. Of course, we call them player missile graphics at the time. The thing that was cool about it was the technology that I used to get the illusion of more sprites moving on the screen than we only had four single color 8-bit wide sprites plus the missiles, which I believe would give you a fifth. But they were two pixels wide. And we were able to combine two sprites to give four colors. So already two of my sprites are gone just for Pedro, just for the character. So I only have three more sprites for everything else. And you'll see in Montezuma's Revenge, the spiders are a sprite, the skulls are sprites. Really, everything that's moving a lot are sprites. And I have a lot more than, two or three moving around in some of those rooms. So I believe that Montezuma's Revenge might have been the first game to really take advantage of the I don't remember the name of the interrupt. Okay, we had the vertical blank interrupt, which basically says, okay, when the raster of the monitor is up top, ready to draw, go ahead and call this function.
Right.
So execute code that synchronizes with the screen. The Atari also allowed you to set an interrupt like that halfway down the screen or wherever on the screen. So I divided the display up into horizontal bands. Like I believe I had 4 or 5 regions where I was able to recycle my sprites on the fly, and that was the key thing to get all that activity going on with the Atari. The raster interrupt recycling the sprites, so it looks so it's the same sprite actually being redrawn later on the display.
Right. I think as long as it stayed lower down the screen, then it was safe. Yeah.
So So I was able to time it, and I was also able to design the levels in a way so that they never would overlap each other. Because if they were going to overlap each other, then you would get the flicker. And one thing I absolutely hated in games is any type of flickering graphics. To me, I look at that as a failure. If I see flickering graphics on an Atari game, that's not good.
Nice. Well, yeah, it looks great and it's fast, and there's a lot. Seems like there's lots going on the screen, so it worked out.
Yeah, and the other thing was, my goal was to make everything big. Also, I mean, there were other games that had a jumping, running character, but they were like little tiny things. Usually one single sprite, small little stick figure type guys. I wanted all the characters to be big, and Bill Kunkel in Electronic Games Magazine, he wrote a spectacular review of the game, and that's what he focused on, how everything was just big, and he felt like that was the main innovation of Montezuma. The fact that you don't have to strain your eyes just to see anything, and I'm like, yeah, he gets it. That's exactly what I was going for. Larger characters, and pretty much every game after that had bigger characters and more of those proportions rather than the stick figure and the little pixely kind of things to grab.
Yeah, I like that the Wikipedia entry about Montezuma's Revenge, like right out the gate, it says the game is an early example of a Metroidvania game, and I had to look that up, and it basically combines elements of the games Metroid and Castlevania, which both came after Montezuma's Revenge by like 2 years.
Yeah, I'm like, wait a second. I've heard of those games, but they did not influence Montezuma. No way. I'll tell you the games that influenced Montezuma. Donkey Kong, of course, and Atari 2600 Adventure, and Atari 2600 Superman. The early non-linear games. That influenced Montezuma's Revenge. Like you brought up today, and I hadn't probably thought about it since I was a teenager, Evil Otto was the bat in my game. Same principle, and I'm sure that inspired me.
Yeah.
Little bits and pieces, little things from so many games. Even when the character Pedro falls off a far building, his legs twitch in the air. There was another game that did that, and I thought it was hysterical. I don't recall what it is. Maybe you know.
Legs twitch in the air. Well, I can think of Jumpman, where Jumpman falls down and then he sits on the bottom and little birdies flew over his head. That sort of thing.
It's probably been done 100 times since, but I just remember the first time I saw it just cracking up like it was the funniest thing in the world. And my character kind of, the Montezuma character, I wanted him to die in funny ways. So, he goes into a puff of smoke and he goes into the fire and his legs twitch and move around if he falls off along a surface. And when the bat takes him away, it's kind of funny. So that's, little elements of humor I like to put into the games.
Super fun. You called the dude Pedro, and I did.
Yes.
Did Parker Brothers want him renamed to Panama Joe?
Yeah. They wanted him renamed. I don't recall the legal issue. Maybe there's another famous Pedro, character, and they didn't want him to conflict with that. I don't remember the whole thing. They originally changed it. Well, they changed it. First, they changed it from Pedro to Panama Jack, which is even worse, trademark infraction, because there was Panama Jack is a whole, they make sunscreen and million products.
Yeah.
So then they changed it to Panama Joe. for Panama Joe. So they settled on with Panama Joe. I never cared for the name Panama Joe, and simply because I didn't come up with that name, I don't use it in my continuation of the game. The game, Montezuma is still being sold for the phones, for iPhone and Android, and the usual places, the App Store and Google Play. So the character to me is always going to be Pedro.
Sure. Do you get a little piece of that, the current sales?
Oh, it's my company.
Excellent. Then you get a big piece of it.
Yeah, I get all of it. but it's not. I mean, you don't. People think that video games you get rich. It's really not the case.
Yeah.
Even selling these apps on my own, and it is popular, and I know. I get the status where it's in the top 100 of action games in most countries. It's not big money. It really isn't. It's really kind of a trickle. But it's passive income. It's nice, and I haven't updated the phone apps. The phone apps is basically the same game with a choice of original graphics and updated graphics, and I haven't updated the phone apps in well over probably 2 years or so. But I am planning on getting back into development though on the product. I really do need to update, particularly the iPhone version, because that doesn't support joysticks.
Mm-hmm.
It's just uses the keypad. It's still very highly rated and very successful, but I really do need to update it and just get with the times. But it's fun and good.
Good. So what
on the phone?
Excellent. So what do you do today as your main thing? How do you spend your time?
Well, for the past 9 years, I've never stopped being a software developer, and I've always been involved in graphics in some way or another. The last 9 years, I've been working exclusively for a company that's involved in internet gaming, gambling.
Mm-hmm.
Can't get into the details, but it's been a wonderful number of years. But it is coming to an end, and I'm going to be on my own again next year. I will probably put myself out there, and take on another software development position somewhere if something comes along. But I will absolutely be working on updating Montezuma for the current ones for the phones.
Awesome.
Personally, I'm really curious about virtual reality, and I would absolutely get back into games again. In the right type of situation. I am personally confused and a little disturbed at how good the virtual reality hardware has gotten. And yet there really is no killer app. There is no virtual reality game or app that people outside, the virtual reality world know of. It hasn't. We haven't had the real killer app yet, and I would love to somehow or another be involved in that. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Someone needs to find that, and then that's going to make it blow up. Maybe you need the VisiCalc of virtual reality.
Well, but to me, what virtual reality is lacking is what the same thing that the old games were lacking. Like in Montezuma, the characters got big and they never got small again. In virtual reality, you've got to cut out the boring time. There should never be a point where you have to wander around with nothing to do for more than a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
in a game. These games where you explore environments, a lot of times it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? Okay, I got to walk around a lot.
Yeah.
And then you get bored. They're like, okay, I got enough of this. Might be a great game, but I'll never know. It's important that the player is constantly engaged.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of these newer games are lacking.
Yeah. What haven't I asked you about the Atari days that I should have? What story did we miss? What secret are you still holding on to that you want to share?
I wish there was something that hasn't really been disclosed. I've given plenty of interviews, and always about this brief period of a few years in my life. The story of the Consumer Electronics shows is one that I've told a million times. The thing I didn't mention when I told you earlier, we shared a booth, but we were not in the games area. We were in the adult area at the time. The Consumer Electronics show, half of it was for the X-rated movies. At the time, there was VHS tapes. So our little video game booth was kind of surrounded by all the porn stars of the day. So in a weird way, it was like a really, we had no idea, of course, when we took the booth that we were going to be this far from the rest of the games in the game industry. But however, it doesn't matter who you are. Everyone went to that part of the show at some point or another. They wanted to meet, John Holmes, and that's what everyone's part of the reason why people go to these shows. And so the game, everyone got a chance to see Montezuma. They probably wouldn't have seen it if I had a little tiny nothing booth in the area next to Atari.
Right.
But because I was in such a weird area, it probably got a little more exposure.
How did you? So once you figured out where you were in the red light district of the CES, how did you feel about it? How did your dad feel about it?
Oh, we thought it was hysterical. Okay. and to this day, and I'll never forget, like in the morning when everyone's setting up, John Holmes came up to me and asked if I had any D batteries, and I'm like, you're John Holmes. He goes, yes, I am. And it was just, Ron Jeremy was there, like all the, that whole 80s crowd was there. And I'm in favor of all these things. I think it's perfectly fine. I like R-rated, X-rated material. It's all good.
That's hilarious.
I thought it was great. I enjoyed meeting those people, and it was a story that I'll be telling for the rest of my life.
Nice. All right. So if you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for continuing. It's a pleasure when a fan contacts me and just tells me, hey, you made my childhood a little more fun. It's great. It's great that we have the internet. It's great that we have the community. It's great that people that are our age, still love these old games and remember them and play them. And it's great that, people our age, that our kids now are being exposed to video game history and, are enjoying these old games. I'm just, I never thought that it would be like this. And I'm very grateful.
Awesome.
And if people who remember the game, and want to just, please join the Facebook page. Whenever there's any news or anything that comes out about Montezuma, I'm always going to, there to post it. A couple months ago, there was big news about Montezuma because Google's artificial intelligence, I forgot the name of their program, but they taught it how to learn to play Montezuma's Revenge perfectly. So it was a major, like they were explaining in this very large article how this particular game is so much harder than the other. Like they taught it to play Pac-Man, they taught it to play many of the simpler arcade games. Then they looked at Montezuma's Revenge as the next challenge. So there were two articles. There was one article that would say, hey, we can do this, but our next challenge is Montezuma. And then several months later, they did manage to write the artificial intelligence to completely play the game, automated playing of Montezuma. So I thought that was kind of cool. And, any news story like that, I'll always put on my Montezuma Facebook page.
Thank you so much, Robert. This is perfect.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. It was fun. It's fun to talk about the old days, and let's do it again.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are two ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.